It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. We say hello to Paris correspondent Erin Zaleski. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to France 24 Chief International Affairs Editor Robert Parsons, Judah Grunstein, who's the Editor-in-Chief of World Politics Review. Where does one find World Politics Review?
At worldpoliticsreview.com.
Okay. Julia Wono of Internet Without Borders. Welcome back. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. The vote was overwhelming. Crowds cheering outside South Korea's parliament when they got news that President Park Geun-hye had overwhelmingly been impeached. A spectacular fall from grace for the storied daughter of the country's assassinated strongman. Park brought down by her relations with the daughter of a late cult leader who's accused of using her poll to extort bribes from the country's biggest conglomerates. After the vote, for the 4th time since this scandal broke, South Koreans got to hear an apology.
오늘 오후에 국회에서 대통령
This afternoon, Parliament passed the presidential impeachment motion. I profoundly apologise to our citizens for causing such a big national confusion amid national security and economic concerns due to my carelessness.
진심으로 송구스럽다는 말씀을 드립니다.
Robert Parsons, a 4th apology, but no resignation.
Yes, I mean, I don't know how South Koreans feel about this, but so looking at from afar, you know, it happens so many times with South Korean presidents that it's not necessarily them that get indicted, but those around them get indicted once they leave power. And I just wonder whether this is more of the same. Although in this case, of course, we're talking about the president itself. Herself is in the focus, and we're seeing a mass movement on the streets of South Korea, particularly in the capital, Seoul, which I think is unprecedented.
A mass movement we haven't seen since the 1980s. What does that tell you?
This is huge. I mean, one wonders too whether this is part of the global mass movement against the establishment, or whether this has very specific South Korean roots. You'd have to be more of an expert on South Korea than me to give an answer to that. But there has to be something, I think, shared with the global movement.
I can't qualify myself as an expert on South Korea, but I know, for instance, that her popularity took a big hit after the ferry sinking, where apparently she was missing in action for 6 or 7 hours afterward. Her chief of staff couldn't locate her in the presidential residence. To me, I have to admit, there was an article, I think, in the New York Times this week about how she's responding to this situation. And apparently she's just very isolated, alone in the presidential residence. She hasn't really been seen in public very much. She's become this tragic figure in a way, obviously by her own making, but in combination with her somewhat tragic past. Her mother died, I believe,
was assassinated,
and she became the acting first lady as the daughter of the president, who was then assassinated as well. So there's that element, of this isolated, tragic figure. At the same time, there is this long-standing problem of corruption in South Korea.
Yeah. Is he going to change anything about the way power is distributed?
The question is the response to this going to be personalized to Park, or is there going to be some sort of demand for measures to actually address the corruption problem?
I think people have also been angry for a long time at what they see as there's been positive economic developments in South Korea over the decades, but they also see the country as in this grip of an industrial and political elite. And
collusion between the elites.
Basically, and I think that this is also the protests and the calls for impeachment, I think, is a reaction to that anger.
Yes, I totally agree with what Erin just said. It's an anger that's has been expressed for the past years. And I remember a poll saying that 88%, I think, of the Southern Koreans did not trust anymore the president. So it's in this debate on how far democracy is in danger in the world, I think maybe the South Korean example is a proof that, you know, the popular demand can still obtain
Yeah, and,
you know,
and Ipsos survey
you
said
know,
3 out of
victories.
4 South Koreans, for them, the number one priority in this country, it's unemployment. There, it's corruption. And they're saying that this could be a seminal moment for the country because the prosecutor who's pushing this case, this could really help the independence of the judiciary in South Korea.
Yes, indeed. Corruption is even more a problem since, despite very beautiful figures, and despite South Korea being pointed out as the one of these tigers in Eastern Asia, the country has nevertheless had a sluggish economy for the past month and years. So obviously, corruption does not help, and people who are citizens who are bearing the burden of this corruption at the end of the day are basically tired. But the other thing that's important to mention is that South Korea is facing North Korea, which is China. And obviously, this sort of instability, will there be stability or instability following this impeachment? Well,
that's an important question. She's only suspended, by the way. She didn't quit. Resignation would have to mean snap elections that her party would be sure to lose. Some say that perhaps the ruling party buying time. Instead, while the Supreme Court rules on that destitution, her prime minister, even more conservative, Wang Kyo-an, is the one at the reins. And Julia Wono mentioning North Korea. And here's a guy who's even more of a nationalist than President Park.
Yes, I mean, I suppose that the existence of North Korea just to the north is likely to put a brake on any sort of popular movement. But the question I suppose uppermost in most people's mind will be that after something like this, how much is actually going to change? I mean, Erin was just talking about the economic success of South Korea over the last few decades, an extraordinary economic success, which has made it possible in a way for a lot of people to turn away, ignore the corruption at the heart of the system and the close alliance between the establishment, the political establishment, and these conglomerates, these chaebol conglomerates. But now that the economy is beginning to slip a little bit, and unemployment, particularly amongst the youth, is growing quite high, and income inequality has grown to almost an unacceptable level, I just wonder whether the cracks are going to start widening, whether the whole edifice could start to fall apart, or whether the political establishment is ready to recognize that something quite drastic has to be done this time round. It's not just a question of changing somebody at the pinnacle of power.
We spoke earlier to a South Korean student who said this collusion between the political elites and the business elites infuriates people.
Well, I think we've seen this cycle in what you were talking about in terms of the global aspects of the story. We've seen this cycle over the past year and a half, 2 years, really since the end of the commodity super cycle, where you have a lot of developing and emerging economies that were dependent on resource sales, especially to China, where the economies have cooled off. And all of a sudden, the kind of corruption schemes that are rampant and that people pretty much know about, even if it hasn't been publicly identified, they know it takes place. They're a little more tolerant of that when the economy is booming and when they have cash in their pocket and they have a steady job and making good income. When things start getting tough and people are tightening their belts, and then corruption schemes and scandals start coming out, the tolerance is a lot lower. We see it in Brazil. We've seen it in South Africa. The other element that I'd add here, and again, it could be a subtle effect, but one of the sort of agreements on which the social contract is based in a place like South Korea is we'll give you prosperity and security, and in return we kind of get to have this collusion on the side between politics and the economy and finance. When you look at what's happened in terms of North Korea, even though I don't think there's a major threat right now, a security threat to take advantage of the situation, the political situation, because the military alert level is always pretty strong. But when you look at the kind of developments in North Korea in terms of now a declared and verified nuclear weapon state with an expanding missile capacity, in other words, now not only is the prosperity angle of the social contract been undermined, but the security aspect is as well. If you're a young person in South Korea now, you're looking at an economic horizon that's not terribly enthusiastic, And you're also living in a situation that's dramatically more insecure than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that might play in, even if it's not vocalized or expressed explicitly, it might play in a subtle way in terms of why people have no patience for this right now.
All right, talking about South Korea is talking about a country that has gone through the throes of being first making that transition to democracy and then perhaps taking it to a second level now, harbingers of democracy on the African continent. Last week, the Gambia, its strongman of 22 years, magnanimously conceding defeat after a presidential election upset. In Ghana this Friday, change through the ballot box is, well, it's something that's already trued and tried. It could happen again, though, if it is confirmed that it's third time lucky for opposition leader Nana Akufo-Addo, who is ahead in his bid to unseat President John Mahama. But the campaign's proved intense, motorcycle gangs intimidating citizens at rallies, sporadic violence, not to mention a nerve-wracking wait for results. There's still some 30% to be counted as we speak, with claims and counterclaims of victory and cyber hacking. For organizers, it's all about keeping cool under pressure.
Collation of votes is still ongoing in a number of constituency collation centers. It is a slow and a painstaking process, but the Commission is taking all steps necessary to ensure that the results certified are accurate and a true reflection of the will of the voters.
Julie Ono, I know the BBC used to have a segment called Unsung Heroes. It's kind of tough being an electoral commissioner when you have a vote that's close like that.
Yes, especially in West and Central Africa. But the question here is who is going to bear the burden of disrupting democracy, stability, economic, enthusiasm despite the crisis. Well, the incumbent president, Dramani Mahama, has a responsibility in the social and economic hardship that the country is going through at the moment, despite the fact that, yes, the commodity prices have decreased. There is a global context which is difficult. Nevertheless, the incumbent does have a responsibility. At the same time, the challenger, who is Akufo-Addo, it's like he's been expecting a victory. It's the third time he's running for presidency, and obviously he's not, running to lose if he runs for 3 times. But at the end of the day, it's really about the Ghanaian people. From what has been observed, indeed, there have been some tensions at some rallies, but I don't think it can account for, a whole population, whether the whole population wants to risk the stability of the country.
The way it's been characterized is it is more tense than previous presidential elections. One of the reasons is the economic context you mentioned. Another reason, though, that's mentioned is the fact that, yes, Ghana is now an oil exporting nation, but is about a lot more oil about to go online. And so the winner of this election could win big. Yes, and maybe no.
Why? Because Ghana is one of the least countries on the continent that has, from the beginning, taken measure to ensure that oil, oil revenues will be reinvested in the local economy or will create jobs.
Isn't that what Chad promised?
No, the country adopted a local content bill in 2013 when oil was discovered. So showing that parliamentaries and the executive really had the intention of having the oil revenues being used for the population. So in that context, I assume it would be difficult, to embezzle as much money as in a country like, I wouldn't name names, but other countries on the continent. So yes, I think it's difficult, and also the country has a very lively local life, local political life. These elections were the general ones with the MPs, and I think mayors will be elected later on. So in this context, it seems very difficult for one man to hope to make money, make a lot of money out of the oil.
And another thing that we actually ran an article on the elections 2 months ago because there were some concerns about the politicization of the Electoral Commission, and that one of the reasons why the previous elections, which were very close, why the results were accepted and why the loser conceded immediately was because there was a real faith in the Electoral Commission and the Supreme Court in terms of being fair and unbiased arbiters of the results. Whereas now there were some questions about whether they'd been politicized and whether they might actually be running for Mahama. And so the idea being that maybe now their decision won't be considered as neutral and as unbiased,
yes.
Leading to the fear that, especially because Ghana has always been sort of held up as the example of this solid democracy where even a 25,000 vote difference, the loser magnanimously concedes and power is transferred.
So and now with local media calling the result and giving it to Akufo-Addo as well. I mean, if it turns against him for a third time, one wonders whether his patience will be.
You got to wonder how they can call the election with still 30% to be.
No, I mean, if none of them
to be
has
cast.
more than 50%.
I mean, the other thing that surprised me a little bit, sort of watching from afar at Ghana, which has obviously been a beacon really for democracy in the whole of Africa, is how low the turnout has been in this election. 49%.
Yes.
That's very low.
That's low.
By Ghanaian standards, anyway.
But at the same time, people were queuing as early as 1 a.m. to be able to vote. Yeah. So it proves that despite a smaller turnout than previous years, citizens, when they exercise their right to vote, they do it they fully do it. And that's why I was insisting on who is going to take the responsibility of a 25 years stability of the Fourth Republic, especially in a country where even Jerry Rawlings, who was who encouraged the institutions as we know them now, is being criticized for being a strong man, despite his great contribution to the Ghanaian democracy. So again, it's a people that's had a tradition of institutional stability. So who is going to take the risk to break that stability? We'll see.
You mentioned the Fourth Republic, Ghana, a country that knew coups and decided haunted by it, and decided that it was better to bury the hatchet to settle political differences. When we come back, we're going to look how democracy is doing on this continent. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.